Well, somebody was promising to sing yesterday. I think I'll do it slightly different, but I will give you a piece of history to start with, actually. And I will talk very briefly about a Norwegian gentleman called Fridtjof Nansen. He was, I think it's fair to say he was a great achiever. He was actually professor in two different topics, zoology and oceanography, while his biggest lasting scientific impression he probably did in the new era of neuroscience. But what is interesting here, he was also a diplomat, by the way. He was ambassador for a while, and he was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. But what is interesting here is that he, in 1893, together with some colleagues, had planned an experiment. They had built a specially built ship, which they had planned to freeze down in the ice, because he had a theory that actually the North Pole was not land, but it was actually sea, and they should within a couple of years be able to drift over the North Pole and be the first ones to cross the North Pole. Actually, they got frozen in a bit too early, so when it was clear that they wouldn't hit the North Pole, Mr. Nansen and one of his colleagues decided that they wanted to ski to the North Pole. Together with some dog and a dog sledge. After a while it became clear that with the short window of opportunity they had because of the Arctic summer, they wouldn't reach it. They got very close, but they didn't get there. Actually, it was an American, Mr. Perry, who probably was the first one there, but it's difficult to document things where you have a moving landmass. Anyway, Mr. Nansen also, they then had to survive for more than a year in the wilderness in the Arctic area, and as you may appreciate, was not much company up there except the occasional polar bear turning out to be very hungry. And this is not so relevant to the story, but one of my favorite stories is actually that they were attacked by a very hungry polar bear. Mr. Johansen, who was the companion of Fridtjof Nansen, actually, got under the polar bear. And the polar bear is, by some, said to be probably the most dangerous animal you can have, and it's very big. But there's still polar heroes. They still stuck to the forms. So Mr. Johansen, under the very hungry polar bear, said to Mr. Nansen, who did not have his gun just by, I think, Mr. Nansen, if you don't hurry up, it may be a bit late for me. He hurried up sufficiently, and Jan Johansen survived, and actually half a year later, when they celebrated Christmas, Nansen suggested that they could be on the informal terms with each other. So after 2.5 years together, they actually were. Interesting thing is, that was at that time, 100 years ago, this was 1893 to 1896, this thing happened. With the exception of a few adventurers who wanted to find out what was at the end of the world, so to see, nobody was very much interested in the polar areas. Let's flash forward to 1997. Then the Arctic Council gets formed. It's formed by the 6 Arctic countries, so to say, the ones who are bordering to the Arctic area, being United States, Canada, Russia, Iceland, and Canada and Norway, plus Sweden and Finland forms the Arctic Council. In the beginning, not very much. It's a nice place to go for senior civil servants, but not very much more than that. But that has changed dramatically over the years. A couple of years ago, when the Americans had the presidency, Barack Obama participated there. We have now, over the years, a number of Asian countries, for instance, have become members, or observers rather, including India, and China, South Korea, Singapore, Japan. At the same time, a number of Asian countries have speeded up research on Arctic topics a lot. India, for instance, has a research station on the Norwegian island Svalbard, together with, as have 8 other countries. So suddenly these areas, from being something really that a few Norwegians and other adventurers were really interested in, it's come to the center of attention for countries, even countries far away. So why is this? And a main reason for that are the climate changes. Because what we have learned to see is that nowhere are the effects of the climate changes so visible as up when the melting of the ice. But secondly also, the melting of the ice does not only have the effects for those of us who live in the vicinity. What we see now is that it has been through research found out that, for instance, there is a clear influence from the melting of the ice with the melting of the ice in the Himalayas. There is a clear correlation between the melting of the ice and the western monsoon, probably also with the eastern monsoon. So that explains very much why this is an area of great interest also for the Asian countries. And this is one of the areas we have the most cooperation with India. Actually, we have, last year we entered into 9 different research projects relating to the Arctic, the Antarctic and the Himalayas. So, it's very important for the climate change, but it also has something else. What happens when what used to be terra incognito, a completely empty land with a few polar bears and some mad Norwegians crossing there from time to time? Well, what is happening when the land is, the ice is melting is also that the strategic importance of this area and changes dramatically. Yesterday somebody talked about that this year, for the first time, a ship without, even without the following of an icebreaker, had traveled the whole northern route, north of Norway and also of Russia to Asia. Actually, if this route is opened or will be utilized, you can reduce the sailing time from Rotterdam to Yokohama, which are the 2 biggest harbors on this side, with 17 days. You don't need to be a mathematician to see that that can have serious economic influences. But what is even more interesting is that in the estimate, for instance, of the American Geographical Survey, Geological Survey, around 22% of all undiscovered oil and gas resources in the world are probably in the Arctic area. There are supposed to be enormous big amounts of other resources also, like minerals and so forth. So this really changes a lot. Actually, interestingly enough, some of you may have read ex-retired Secretary of MAA's Charan's book on Indian foreign policy from Kautilya until today. And he also observes there actually in the book, because he thinks that this is an interesting development, and points out that maybe some of those who will benefit most really economically on this will be the 5 polar states who normally would not have that much before would not have that great benefit from it. So we see that the climate changes actually may have very big geostrategic changes also. Not only that, but I mean, if the forecasts are correct, in 2050 there may not be any ice at all. So instead of being this big empty land, which we really couldn't traverse except a few hardy explorers trying to cross it, it could be the new bridge between Asia, Europe and so on. Change the globe completely. And so we see the strategic implications of these are very, very big. But of course there are lots of other effects of the climate changes which also will change the way we can operate and the way the world is operating. The most important thing is of course that 90% of the additional heat created by the CO2 emissions are stored in the sea. So any kind of change there can have very dramatic effects. Actually there are lots. The problem for us is also we can see a number of challenges, for instance that the seawaters are rising, and for instance for small island states, for instance like the Maldives, which have a average height over the sea of 1.3 meters, this is very dramatic. I mean, for the last 100 years the sea levels have risen with about 13 centimeters, but if the forecasts are right, it may be another meter, and so it's depending very much, of course, for the survival of many of states on how we are going to to deal with the big challenge we have here. So climate changes are really one of the biggest challenges we have today. And I think I should also add, just on when I talk about on the uncertainty on the Arctic, for instance, one of the reasons why people can live in Norway, and for instance, and even that we have ice-free harbors, is the Gulf Stream coming all the way with warm water from Mexico. Without that, it would have been ice most of the times. But there are some speculations that the heating of the water also may influence very much the currents of the sea, which could have very dramatic effects also. So there are lots of question marks which just underline the importance of more research. We have really one of the areas where we have to focus most attention is actually on the oceans, exactly because they are so central for our survival as a globe, but also because we still know so little compared to many other areas, and it's so complicated relationships. But still, with what we know and what we can do to control the situation, it is very important. One of the best ways we can act so that we don't have, or so that we reduce actually the impact of environmental degradation of the climate change, is that we ourselves have very good management plan for what we do and what is the impact of what we are doing. Because somebody talked yesterday, for instance, about technology leading to unforeseen consequences, for instance, with the plastic bags. Yeah, that's true, but technology generally has been helpful for us. Technology generally has brought us forward. But with all kind of steps forward, there are also downsides. That's why it's very important that we have very good management plan. And that is one of the things I think we can help others with. We have a very strong system of management plans, of assessment, of trying to see the effects of the ecosystem or any kind of changes, which establishment of oil, for instance, if we are drilling oil, whether we are going to have new traffic going through some areas and so forth. It's very important to have this. So we have a science-based, very thorough management study process, which is at least a small contribution to this. And we have also in our international policy actually assisting other countries with management of fishery resources, but also ocean resources is a central element. And in this case, it's actually interesting to mention that the first development cooperation we ever had was with India. Started in Kerala in 1952, went on for 20 years. I've spoken to several representatives here who know well about it, where actually the idea was to help people being able to fish further out so they could utilize the resources, to help estimate the resources and the stocks so that we could have sustainable fishing, and also to teach processing of fish so that you could get better economy in the fisheries. And these, although we have pulled out nearly 50 years ago, these are still very much ongoing concerns here. I will just also, since plastic was mentioned yesterday, because this just illustrates one of the things. This is a land-based problem, as was said yesterday. I mean, it's not from the ship. This thing comes. But I mean, just a few months ago, there was lots of international attention paid to a small beaked whale which was found dead outside Bergen in Norway. Well, why was that? Well, it was because when they opened the stomach, they found that it was full of plastics. On one side of one of the plastic balls, bags, it read in English, fresh chicken. Obviously false advertising, but nevertheless illustrating a bit the situation we are in. What we know now is that about 8 million tons of plastic waste make its way into the ocean every year. So it's really to find ways of combating this, which is very difficult. It's one of the challenges we all have, because in a world where the population is growing, we expect another 2.5 billion being added. And we're actually the most energy efficient way to grow food is actually in the sea. We are dependent on healthy environments in the sea. And that means that it's extremely important for us that we find ways to work together to combat the challenges in the sea, because this is a common good. It's an area we all have interest in fighting against this. As a small contribution actually to fight the plastic challenge in the Norwegian state budget, which was published on Thursday, there was set aside $20 million for trying to find ways of combating this. Of course, it's a drop in the ocean, but at least it's the first drop, as we can say. But I think also one element which is important to stress when it comes to the ocean and our own responsibilities, as was stressed very much by the Honourable Minister Gadkari when he was here, transport on the seas is a very environmental friendly way of transporting in many ways, because it takes much less energy to transport big amounts of goods than others. But I think it's also important in this situation that we have a strong focus also on what we do at sea. We have stronger conventions on for instance, on regulating all kinds of discharges or ships. But I think also it's important for us to move ahead to prove that we can have environmentally friendly transport. I think from that point of view we welcome very much the strong focus, for instance, Minister Gadkari and the government has here on also that we should use environmentally friendly energy forms of transport. As was mentioned also yesterday, that is also one of the areas where we have focused very much, again because we think it's very important. The only way we can deal with these challenges is actually that we have to go down to actions. That's why we have tried to have also tax incentives and so forth to develop technologies which should be as environmentally friendly as possible. And that's why, for instance, we have developed LNG-driven ships. As you heard yesterday, 70 out of the 90 LNG-driven ships in the world today are Norwegians. That's why we have focused very much on having battery-driven ships. We have developed the first battery-driven fishing vessels. We have developed the first battery-driven ferry boat. Actually, next year, and that has got lots of attention here also, we will get the first autonomous electric cargo ship transporting cargo fertilizers between 3 ports in Norway. So this is just a part of the same effort where we also have, coming back to the fact that yes, there are challenges with the technology, but technology can help us very much also to meet the big challenges we have when it comes to the environment. So, in conclusion, we all have a big vested interest in restoring and maintaining healthy oceans that allow for sustainable use of the resources. That's the only way that we can secure that these oceans can provide food, energies and minerals to support some other 2.5 billion people or global population. Thank you very much.